Welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is your place to explore the beauty and order of the cosmos.
And your connection to it all.
My name is Amanda Poole-Walsh, and I'm the founder of Astrology Hub.
And I'm Merlin Levine, your cosmic navigator.
Now let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Well, hello, everyone. Hi, Rick. Well, welcome to the Cosmic Connection, everyone. I'm obviously not Amanda Poole-Walsh, but I am.
It's not that obvious at all.
Bro, I'll try to bring a wig next time.
And do we want to tell anyone why you've taken over Astrology Hub and abducted Amanda and is holding her ransom? Or
I actually am not sure why I'm taking over. I just said yes. But yes, I'm here and I'm excited to connect with you all. I hope that I do a good job subbing for Amanda. And just a little bit about myself, just to introduce myself, since you guys have never seen me before. I am part of the Astrology Hub's tech team. I am an Electional and Horary astrologer and a sound engineer. And yes, that's pretty much all I do. Thank you, everybody, for being here with me. And thank you, Rick, for letting me do this.
Well, cool. So
Yeah.
we are here today, I understand, to talk about Pluto.
Yes, and I'm so excited to talk about Pluto with you because Pluto is one of the planets in astrology that I still don't understand too much because I started with traditional astrology, so Pluto is never mentioned. So it's nice to be here and learn. And I also didn't get to watch the Pluto Return webinar that you were in that people can actually still buy. Oh, Mary, hello. Thanks for the welcome. But yeah, people can still buy the Pluto Return webinar that you were in. And because I didn't get to watch it, I don't think I was even working for the Astrology Hub yet when it came out. I'm just glad that I get to hear firsthand from you your thoughts on the notorious Pluto Return.
Well, you know, I have interesting thoughts on it because obviously we are going through a Plutonic period, and we'll swing back to that in a little bit. But I'm not convinced that we're having a Pluto return. And I said that on the panel discussion and didn't take it very far and wasn't saying that to or to make less of anything that anyone was saying. But before we get started, let me just throw a little bit of what's the saying? A spanner, which I think is a British term for a monkey wrench. To throw a spanner in the works, or to throw a monkey wrench in the works. And I think those mean the workings or the gear actions of a big machine. So I'm going to throw a wrench into the gears. NASA unequivocally says on its website, and anyone can go check this, just Google NASA Pluto orbit, and you will learn that it takes Pluto 248 years to go around the sun. A Pluto cycle is 248 years, like a Saturn cycle is 29 and a half, like a Uranus cycle is 84, like a lunar cycle is 29 days, like a solar, those are things that we know. So if we're looking at the Pluto return for the birth of the United States, of which there are many different charts. But one of the two most widely used charts, maybe the most widely used chart, is the chart for the signing of the Declaration of Independence on the afternoon of July 4th, 1776. Now, I did not employ any high-level calculus or bizarre functions when I took 1776 and added 248 to it, because that's how long it takes Pluto to go around the sun once, according to NASA, and 1776 plus 248 equals 2024, not 2022.
Right.
What's the problem?
Well, we're 2 years behind.
Well, we are. And it's an interesting problem. I know the why of the problem, and I'm going to share that with you. I've had discussions with other people about this. It's something that I'm going to be watching, and it's actually sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole that's got me thinking about some other things. And so even though you thought you were tuning into a what's happening while the United States has its Pluto return, we're taking a little bit of a detour on the way because we're missing something. Something's not right. We're only at 246 years, and we're saying that Pluto returns now this month. February is when it happens. And the problem here is actually the difference between tropical and sidereal astrology. The problem has to do with what's called the precession of the equinox. Many of you immediately know what I'm talking about and can probably reason very quickly as to where I'm going with all of this. But I want to take the short way there. I want to take the longer way there so that people can grasp this. Stephanie just wrote, Pluto orbits the Earth on an ecliptic and it's slightly different in years. That's not the reason, Roberta. What you're saying is true, but this has nothing to do with the tilt of Pluto's orbit away from the ecliptic, not the elliptic, the ecliptic, which is the plane that is determined by the Earth moving around the sun. That makes like a frisbee, and if you extend that out in all directions, that makes the plane of the ecliptic. And yes, planets move above and below the ecliptic as they're going around. Many of them come up on one side and down on the other on a very regular basis. But that's not the issue of what we're talking about here.
Right. Can I ask a question, actually?
Absolutely. You're the moderator. Yeah. You get to interrupt me more than I get to interrupt you. Although I'm the Aries, and you're going to have to over-stomp me in order to stop me from interrupting.
Well, I'm just a simple Cancer. I'll try. But my question was, even though we could be those 2 years off, would we still technically be within orb or not?
Yeah,
really?
Yes. Yeah, and that's where we're going with this. I mean, the discussion that we'll have in a bit will be the fact that we can already see, the ramifications, the consequences, the significations, the events all around us that are part of this. However, the question of when is exact is still, and Stephanie says the same thing. But it's not quite just sidereal versus tropical, and I'm going to get a little mathy on you here, but not very. But it's important that we do this because otherwise we'll never quite get it right. So the precession of the equinox means that every year at the equinoxes, the spring vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox, depending upon whether we're north or south latitude. At the equinoxes, we make a measurement and we know those are exactly the equinoxes because there's 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness. The precession of the equinox means that the Earth, if you spin a top, and you spin it as best you can one direction, as it slows down, it begins to wobble, but it wobbles backwards to the direction you spin it until it just falls over.
Right.
That backward wobbling is called precession or precessive movement. Because if you progress, you're moving in the same direction. Precess means to move backwards. Mm-hmm. So what that means is that every year on the first day of spring, at the moment of the spring equinox here in the north or the autumnal equinox in the south, we reset Aries to be 0 degrees of the zodiac. That's what the tropical zodiac is. It's based upon the seasons, the equinox, beginning of spring. Every year at the beginning of spring, if we do a sighting to where the stars are, every year it will look like the stars slip back 1/72nd of a degree,
Right.
almost negligible. But that means 1 degree every 72 years. And that also, is almost negligible. But once we take that 1/72nd of a degree every 72 years, and we say over the course of a couple of thousand years, that slips back 30 degrees or one whole sign, or for that matter, over the course of some 26,000 years, that will make one complete slippage all the way around. This is the determination factor of what we call ages in astrology.
Right.
The age of Aries would be when the spring equinox occurs, when when 0 degrees of Aries is at the beginning, is in effect rising at the beginning of the spring equinox. The equinox precesses, though, backwards. So from the age of Aries, we then go into the age of Pisces. It goes backwards because the top is spinning backwards. It looks like the planets, which actually make it look like the planets are moving backwards, but the planets, if they're holding their own space, actually move forward at the degree of the precession. We'll get back to that in just a moment. So, and this, of course, was the reason why in the 1500s, Pope Gregory the 13th added, he added 10 days or 11 days into the calendar, because Easter, which is supposed to be a holiday related to spring, because of the precession of the equinox, March basically was slipping back into further and further into the winter. And so the correction factor basically got the calendar right, and it readjusted the leap years, which used to be a leap year was every 4th year, but now there is no leap year on a century unless it's divisible by 400, like the year 2000 was.
Oh, wow.
So the calendar itself had to be adjusted because it was no longer pinned to the seasons. Now, what the hell does this have to do with Pluto? It's actually quite simple and quite interesting. On July 4th, 1776, the United States birth chart had Pluto at 27 degrees and 33 minutes. 27 degrees of Capricorn and 33 minutes, about 27 and a half degrees of Capricorn, which is where Pluto will be on February 20th. We're just less than 2 weeks away from Pluto in the sky being at 27 degrees Capricorn, 33 minutes for the first time in almost 250 years. But here's the problem. NASA tells us that it takes Pluto 248 years to go around the sun once. 248 years is the annual cycle. Is the cycle of the sun in is the cycle of Pluto in years.
Right.
Just like it takes the Earth 1 year to go around the sun, it takes Pluto 248 years. You can Google Pluto orbit NASA and you can get the information right from them. So we have the birth of the United States of America with Pluto at 27 degrees Capricorn, 33 minutes. And that was on July 4th, 1776. You add 248 because that's how long it takes Pluto to go around once, and you get 2024. Pluto will not be returning to where it was when the Declaration of Independence was signed until January of 2020, actually February of 2024. So what's the difference? The difference is that because of precession, which is 1 degree every 72 years, in the time that it takes Pluto to go around the sun once, which is 248 years, we know that means that 3.4 degrees have been lost to precession, because 1 degree, the precession is 1 degree every 72 years, and therefore it's almost 3.5 degrees in 248 years. If you just round some of this off, 70 degrees, 7 times 3 is 21. It would have been 3 70-degree chunks in 210 years. So we're at about 3.5 degrees of precession. What that means is that sidereally, if we were to look at where Pluto is in the sky for real, Pluto is at 0 degrees Aquarius, 58 minutes. Why do I know that? Because I take 27 degrees of Capricorn in 33 minutes. And we know that the precession has been 3.42 degrees. So 27 plus 3 degrees is 0. So that brings us to 0 degrees of Aquarius from 27 Capricorn plus 3, right. 27, 28, 29, 30. 30 is 0 degrees of the next sign. So we're at 30 degrees of Capricorn and 33 minutes. But the 0.42, we convert that. 0.42 turns out to be 25 minutes. If it was 0.5, it would be 30 minutes, because 30 minutes is half, of a whole degree. There are 60 degrees in a minute. Like I said, this is the most mathy that we're going to get. And if any of this is going over your head, trust me, he said.
Wait, so are you saying that the US's Pluto is really in Aquarius as opposed to?
Well, I'm saying that sidereally, if we were to look in the sky, we would not see Pluto at 27 degrees and 33 minutes of Capricorn. If we were to look today, we would see it at 0 degrees 58 minutes of 0 degrees of Aquarius and 58 minutes, almost 1 degree of Aquarius, 3.5 degrees away from where it is tropically. The tropical degree is the same. And this is confusing. And quite frankly, I thought I completely understood, tropical versus sidereal. And I really think I do, but I'm a bit hesitant to say that just because Pluto is back at the same degree, that it has returned to where it was, because it hasn't. It's 3 degrees away. And the very simple mathematics on all of this is that Pluto in the natally in the USA chart is at 27 degrees Capricorn, 33 minutes. It will reach there on February 20th. It reaches 27 degrees of Capricorn in 33 minutes. And then it goes retrograde, and it goes over that same point again on July 11th. That's this summer, 2022. Then it turns direct, and it goes over that same point again on December 28th of 2022. Next year, on March 23rd, Pluto goes into Capricorn, but it doesn't quite reach that 0 degree 58 minute. It retrogrades in May. And
did you say Capricorn or Aquarius?
I'm sorry. Pluto goes into Aquarius on March 23rd, 2023, and it doesn't quite reach the actual degree of 0 Aquarius, I meant 58 minutes. So it's not quite there. It turns retrograde, and it goes back into Capricorn in May, and then it goes back into Aquarius on January 22nd, 2024, and it reaches that 0 degree of Aquarius 58 minutes, which is the degree of the unprocessed, it's the sidereal degree, if you will, the star degree, the actual degree of Pluto on February 20th, 2024. And it will do it 3 times because of the direct, retrograde, direct. It'll go retrograde over that point in July of 2024. It goes actually back into Capricorn in 2024, just for a touch, back into Aquarius it goes back into Capricorn in September of 2024, goes back into Aquarius in November, and then the third and final return to the actual place where Pluto is on December 28th, 2024.
Right.
Now, what we have here is really 2 separate intertwined sets of dates. And I'm not here to say that one doesn't work and the other does. They're close enough that, with the Saturn return, if Saturn's within a degree or 2 or even 3, we're already feeling the effects of that return.
Right.
And Pluto being a much, much slower cycle, that we're certainly in orb. Davis says, you're losing me. Let me see if I can just say this again in a different way, that just so that everyone can be on board. The difference between tropical and sidereal astrology, as hopefully most, if not all, astrologers know, is that when we say a planet is at 10 degrees of Gemini, that doesn't mean that it's in the constellation of Gemini, because the astrology that we do is seasonal astrology or tropical astrology. The Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn are the highest and the lowest point that the sun reaches in the sky because of the Earth's tilt. The seasons are not determined by how close or far away the Earth is from the sun. In fact, in the northern hemisphere, the Earth is closer to the sun in winter than it is in summer. But the Earth is tilting toward the sun, so we get more direct sun, so it's warmer.
Right.
But there's 2 different zodiacs. One is the tropical zodiac that is used by modern Western astrologers, which is the seasonal zodiac, which is based upon the resetting of 0 degrees of Aries every year at the beginning, the first moment of spring, which is why we call it the tropical zodiac, because the seasons are determined as the sun moves in its declination up and down, above and below the ecliptic. It reaches the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn at the solstices, and it's on the equator, the equinox equator, on the equinoxes. And so what I'm saying here is, normally in a given lifetime, this precession, we're not necessarily concerned with it, because it's only 1 degree every 72 years. So in other words, at your Saturn return at age 29 and a half, it's less than a half a degree. And so it's kind of there. Now, the question is, on these longer term cycles, what's important? Is it the return to the tropical, which is what we're all using when we talk about the return of Pluto to 27 degrees 33 minutes? Or do we need to take something into consideration that says that's not where Pluto is? because of the precession of the equinox, excuse me, because of the precession of the equinox, Pluto is actually physically at 0 degrees Aquarius, 58 minutes.
Right. And
just one other thing, Joe, and so here it may just be a question of languaging, because Pluto is not returning to where it was. It's returning to where we would map it if we were using this shifting zodiac that we use to keep the seasons in line with the stars.
Right. And the question that I had was that you mentioned the Saturn return. So would you apply that same sort of technique to a Saturn return as well? Or is it really different because of how much time Pluto takes to actually travel?
You've asked a very good question, and I don't have an answer.
Right.
I do know that in SolarFire, which is the chart calculation program that I use, I do know that when you calculate your solar return, there's many astrologers who use, and it's a simple box check in SolarFire, that if you want to calculate your solar return, do you want to use the precessed position or the tropical position? I've always used the tropical position.
Right.
So, it's, again, the 29.5 degree would be accurate for the Saturn return if we're using the tropical points, but maybe that would make it closer to 30 years if we were using the sidereal. I'm not sure. I'm not, and I have talked to a couple of people about this, and I've got mixed responses. I'm early in my research. When Amanda said that, asked me if I would do today the Pluto return, I said, I'd rather not, because I'm not convinced, and I haven't really completed my research. And I told her what I was kind of thinking about. And she said, well, why don't you just share that? And so I am. I know that when I talked with Brett Joseph, with Gemini Brett,
right,
who is one of my go-to people when I'm talking about celestial mechanics, he basically tried to settle me down and said, no, I'm just getting distracted. It's a tropical return, and that's what we do, and the other thing is fictitious. I'm not saying he's wrong. I just don't believe him. No, I mean, I need to do more research, and I'm thinking that we all do, because I'm not going to shift and become a sidereal astrologer, but if anything, we just need to be aware, and this is really the bottom line of all of this, that in 246 years, Pluto is not returning to where it was. That takes 248 years.
Right.
We could give it another name. We could call it a tropical Pluto return, but we need that word in there because it's not a Pluto return. Pluto is a 248-year cycle. It's 2 years difference than what we're looking at here. And so, Stephanie, I'm sorry if I'm overcomplicating it, but it's something that I think that we need to do some research on. And enough said there.
And maybe a good question would be then, like, what would be the difference between both of them? I guess, like, other than the timing, of course, but one of the other things.
I think ultimately we're looking at Plutonic stuff happening right now. Totally. I'm not arguing with that at all. But then again, we were looking at Plutonic stuff happening a year or two ago, even when Saturn joined Pluto back in January of 2020. We were already looking at Plutonic stuff. Anyone who has done both Vedic and Jyotish, Vedic astrology, and modern Western astrology side by side knows that it's really interesting because with totally different symbol sets, they both work.
Right.
And so I'm just bringing this out into discussion because there's so many people who are calling this a Pluto return, and Pluto is not, it can't be returning to where it was because that's 248 years, and that is 2024. That's it.
Right. Now, I guess then, taking Pluto aside, if we're just to look at tropical versus sidereal to try and understand like which one is the best, which one we want to go with, or anything like that, what would you say is like the symbolic difference between both of them? Like, what would a
Well,
tropical placement tell you that a sidereal doesn't, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think that Albert Einstein very clearly explained that time and space are interrelated, and that they are fluid, and that you need to pick a fixed point of reference, and that once you pick a point of reference and everything works to that, then you're cool.
Right.
Sidereal astrology picks the stars to be the fixed point of reference. But what happens is, over the years and the centuries, these seasons become unhinged from the zodiac. Aries is no longer at the beginning of spring. Aries is then in winter, and then it's in autumn, and then it's in midsummer. It goes backwards over that 26,000 year cycle. So to me, sidereal astrology is a spatial reference,
Right.
and tropical astrology is a temporal reference. Which one is right or better? They're both right, or neither of them is fully right, because you can't map both of them at the same time, because it's like that particle wave thing. You can't know both at the same moment. You can either know one or the other. And so from that standpoint, either of them is right as long as you pick one. And what's the difference? I think this, and I've talked with many Vedic astrologers, and many agree. There are many people who have very different opinions, but Western tropical astrology, using the tropical zodiac, it's like home. It's like home base. It's like where we are, and it has that feeling of being, Earth and our life centered. Whereas the Vedic tradition is more oriented toward the soul. It's a bit more cosmic, if you will,
Right.
and it's a little bit detached, or a lot detached, from the actual seasons themselves. Which one's more accurate? I don't think you can go there. I think that they are both. I think it's the practitioner that makes it accurate or not. Both systems obviously are valuable.
Right. And then do you think it would be fair to say that like the tropical return, since we're talking about like space, is a more like tangible, like we feel it, we see it, it's like right there, Pluto. And the sidereal can be a little bit more of like a spiritual experience, or maybe more of like I guess not necessarily spiritual, but less about like the actual space and your actual resources in your day-to-day life, and more about like the grand schemes. And this is a question, obviously hypothetical. I don't expect you to have the answer, but what would you say to that?
Yeah, I do have an answer, and that is I don't know. I don't know.
That's fair.
As an astrologer, I'm not afraid to say I don't know, but I'm also not afraid to say I know. And I know that it takes Pluto 248 years to go around once. So I know this is not Pluto returning to where it was. It's Pluto returning to something, but it brings into question so much else of what we do. Remember, people before this generation didn't have this kind of issue because they didn't have the accuracy of the computers that we have.
Right.
And so does this mean that we need to take a look at correcting for other transits? Maybe, but maybe not. I'll watch them. I mean, I'm going to watch this Pluto thing unfold, and we'll see what it does. In the meantime, anyone who's had Pluto transiting Pluto conjunct an angle of their chart, or a luminary in particular, or square or oppose, or all of those, knows that the exact date of that conjunction square opposition was relatively unimportant when compared to that whole 2 to 3 or 4 year sweep of Pluto going through that area. That it's not about a specific single event. Well, sometimes it's event. And by the way, Cheryl says, this is why Rick Tarnas focuses on the aspects rather than the sign of the planet, because the aspects do not change when you're using, whether you're using sidereal or tropical. That is absolutely true. Thank you, Cheryl, and hi to you. But you see, the thing is that um, that when in an individual Pluto transit, I always get the feeling. Let's say you're having Pluto. Let's say you have a Capricorn moon, and Pluto has been in Capricorn forever. Well, not really. It's moving through Capricorn.
I mean, the Pluto return is supposed to be where my descendant is, and opposing my sun. So there you go.
Right, and opposing your sun. So with a transit with Pluto in an opposition, conjunction, or square, one might find the date, and one might go a year or two before, because Pluto moves not only so slowly, but it's direct retrograde. It can come up and come within 15 or 20 minutes, a half a degree of being exact, and not come to the exact until a year and a half later after a retrograde in another direct. So that Pluto moves slowly enough that it's often felt a year or two coming, a year or two when it's exact, because Pluto and Neptune sometimes move slow enough and can grab a planet where instead of getting a direct, retrograde, direct, a 1, 2, 3, you can actually get a direct, retrograde, direct, retrograde, direct, and you have 5 hits on a transiting natal planet, and that's extended even further. And then you still have another couple of years going. So we're looking at an extended period of time. So all I'm saying is that we are already in this period of time. But I think it's more than an academic question as to when is the Pluto return. I don't have the answer, but I think history will help us unfold this. And I know that I will be going back with my clients, and I will begin looking at slower moving planets like Uranus. Neptune is tough because often the effects of Neptune are less urgent and immediate than the effects of a transiting Saturn or Uranus. But I will look at these and see whether there's something else going on. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
Right. And I saw in the comments somebody asked, like, how can we prepare for this? And I think that's a really good question, because now, since we're not so much worried about like the exact date, we're really worried about not worried. We're just focusing on like a long span of years. We're already in it. So we've already been working with it. We're already dealing with it. So I guess it's less of a question of how we prepare for it, but more so of like, how do we keep going with this?
All right. So in preparing for it, I would say that we prepare for a Pluto transit like we prepare for a colonoscopy.
Nice.
We want to be as clear and empty as we can be. No, it's true, because I and many of my associates and friends, I don't know how far this extends in the astrology world, but amongst my people, we often refer to Pluto as the rotor-rooter guy.
Nice.
Pluto's going to come in, and Pluto is going to get any shit that's buried out into the open. That's what Pluto's job is as Lord of the Underworld. When we have a Pluto transit, he's going to take that shit that's hidden and is going to bring it out into the open.
Totally.
And of course, it's a Jungian concept that when things are in the unconscious, we're at their whim. But when things are conscious, it's not like we immediately can control it, but we can work with it and learn how to integrate it in a way that it has less power than it did when it was unconscious. And that's how do we work with this, is we offer Pluto no resistance to bringing the things out that Pluto is going to bring out. Because the more we go into denial, the more we clench, the more we bury stuff, the deeper we go get heavy machinery and bury everything another 40 or 100 feet below. Pluto don't care. Pluto, the rotor-rooter, will find it and get it out into the open. And so from that standpoint, if you want to just talk about ease or difficulty of a transit, Pluto is going to get harder the more you fight it and hold on to what you thought your identity was, or the more you fight or hold out of the awareness who you really are, and bury that because of you want to present who you think you should be rather than who you really are.
Right.
So how do we prepare for it? Psychotherapy. Not tongue in cheek, but any form of yoga, any form of working with the energies to strengthen ourselves, but also with humility. Pluto doesn't like it when we take Pluto's power and apply it for personal wealth.
Right.
And therefore, with Pluto stuff, it's important to remember that we're working for the good of all. It's the Mr. Spock, on the Star Treks, the good of the many outweighs the needs of the few, or the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I think these are all important things for Pluto to be working with. It's easy with Pluto to become fearful, build boundaries, become paranoid, build walls. And I think that the way we work with Pluto is we become aware of those things in our lives. And when Pluto shines the light somewhere into the darkness, rather than trying to break all the lights and crawl deeper and all become ostriches and dig our heads in the sand, which ostriches don't really do. But rather than doing that we go, Pluto, thank you. It's so good to see you. Here's what I think you need to see. And maybe this is what I never told my dad. I need to bring this out in the open and in this relationship. And you start bringing things out that before were hidden, not just in relationships or intimate relationships, but in all aspects of your life. It's Joseph Campbell wrote, "The cave we fear has our greatest treasures." Right. And that's basically a very Plutonic concept.
Yeah, that's giving me, honestly, not to make this about myself, but that's giving me war flashbacks. Because like I said, Pluto is like right at my descendant, and this whole ordeal is happening like that. And what had happened, I wasn't even like an astrologer at the time, but I was just about to open a studio to start being like full-time sound engineer. And that's what I was gonna do. I was living in Toronto, in the city, grand old time. And then Pluto came through. The pandemic came, and then I had to literally shut down the studio that I had just bought after a month, and that was totally terrible. And then in the meanwhile, I'm like talking to astrology with all my friends, and they're always like, "You should become an astrologer. You should do this. Like, you don't shut up about it. Like, what are you doing?" And what happened is that having the studio actually shut down actually gave me the opportunity to be like, oh, this astrology thing is like very real, and I really do like it, and I will pursue it. And through that, I decided to just give up on music, and I'm like, I'm not gonna do music anymore. I'm now an astrologer. And then Pluto retrogrades, comes back in, and then I become an astrologer who also does music.
Well, I got some bad news for you, dude. Astrology is music.
That is true. That's what I'm finding out.
That when Pythagoras and Johannes Kepler referred to the music of the spheres, they were not talking in metaphor. We normally hear music through our ears, but what we're hearing is frequency vibrations between maybe 100 vibrations per second, all the way up to maybe 40, 50,000 higher for younger kids. 80,000 vibrations a second. When we hear a piano and someone plunks that A above middle C, that's 440 back and forth vibrations every second. And a vibration is a cycle, and planets are cycles. And right. with the moon is a 13 cycle per year musical tone, but it's so slow and low frequency we don't hear it with our ears. Saturn is 3 cycles a century. Pluto is 4 cycles a millennium. But they're actual musical notes that instead of hearing with our ears, our cells are attuned to them in harmonic resonances. Right. our lives dance to them, but it's still like that's the band that's playing. It's just it doesn't come through our ears. When I look at a chart and when I work with my students, I train them to forget about the isolated points. I don't mean forget about them completely, but when we look at a chart, we're trying to see the hum. I know that's a metaphor. We're trying to hear the hum, because it's the hum of a chart that makes us that contributes to who we are, not any one planet in any one sign. When I hear my astrologer told me I'd never have a successful relationship because I have a Venus-Mars conjunction in the 8th house and that's blah, 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 I get sick. I mean, I get physically sick because to me, that's damaging to a client. And it's just not necessarily the truth. We get handed down these axioms, and I think I've digressed and I'm coming back.
No, totally. I think that was a fun digression, though, and I think like people in the comments seemed like they enjoyed it too. But
Pluto, someone has a question about Pluto retrograde.
Oh yes, let me look at that. Someone, I think it got lost.
No, it's Maria Joy. No, that's Saturn conjunct Pluto retrograde. But yeah, someone said, "What about Pluto retrograde?" It was, and is Pluto direct or retrograde? And I assume that question is Pluto direct or retrograde right now. And right now, we're in a very strange and magical time where Pluto and Neptune and Chiron and Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and Venus and Mercury are all direct.
Right.
I think we're about a 6-week period. And except when the moon, like it just did when it moved into Gemini, except for 2 weeks when the moon moves through that half of the sky, all the planets are contained within one half of the nodal cycle. Very unusual energy that we have going. But the question about Pluto retrograde, to me, is really a question about retrogrades in general. I do not hold the party line here. I see nothing bad about retrograde planets. I don't see any planets as good or bad, but I see a lot of difficulty that people can have with a retrograde planet, and I think I know why. And it's not complicated. A planet is retrograde when it's closer to Earth than it is in any other time in its cycle.
Mm-hmm.
You look at a chart and Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron or Eris, they're all outside the orbit of Earth. If any of them are in opposition to the sun, or even within a couple of signs of that opposition, they are retrograde, period. Why? Because the Earth is between them and the sun, and therefore they're closer to Earth than they normally are.
Right.
But if any of those same planets are either conjunct the sun or within a few signs of conjunct the sun, they can't be retrograde. Because they're on the far side. Now, that's different with the inner planets of Mercury and Venus, because when they're conjunct the sun, because Earth is always farther away, when they're conjunct the sun, they can either be retrograde, but that means they're between the Earth and the sun. So we're just coming out of a Venus and a Mercury retrograde phase, and that means that both of them passed between the Earth and the sun. And the next time that they're in conjunction with the sun, they're going to be all the way on the far side, and they're going to be really far away, which means they will be direct. And they'll come all the way around the sun and again come between the Earth and the sun, and they'll go retrograde again. There's nothing inherently wrong with a retrograde planet, but there are two important things that happens. One is that it covers territory that it's covered before. And this is incredibly important, especially when we're talking about Pluto right now. And I want to hold that off just for a moment, but it's about Pluto-Venus right now.
Right.
The second piece, though, is that that there is a concept that's been kind of largely dropped in astrology, but it used to be a thing, and it wasn't dropped because it was wrong. It's just computer programs tend not to show it, and it used to be something that you were able to calculate when you hand calculated a chart, and that is a thing called, I don't know what that was, something on your computer, I think. That's a thing called distance value. If anyone knows what the distance value is or what that means, plop it in the chat box. I'm just interested in how much this term is still around. I've talked about it before, but a distance value has to do. It's a number between 0 and 1. And someone, you have a mic on? Is there some noise coming in from somewhere that's
is it still, is this still happening?
Gone. No, it's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The distance value is this. The distance value is a number that shows us how close or far from Earth a planet is, with the scale 0 to 1 being as far away as it can be or as close as it can be. The concept is like a radio station. Let's say you like listening to a particular radio station, and you get in your car and you drive, you'll reach a certain place where it's harder to tune for that radio station. And then you'll reach a place where you can't find it anymore. You can't get it. So planets are like radio stations. They're like broadcasting information. And if we're really, 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 really close to a planet, which shows up as retrograde, that signal is going to be blasting. A basic rule of natal chart interpretation that many people miss, but it is so simple and so basic. And it comes from a Jungian concept. And this isn't his words, it's my words, but it's his concept. And it's basically, every planet just wants a voice. Every planet just wants to be heard. And when a planet isn't heard, then it becomes, it's either suppressed or repressed. It's not, and when something isn't heard and it has a voice that it needs to speak, that then appears as a projection. We bump into it out there. This is why oppositions are so often relationship oriented, because if we have two planets pulling in opposite directions, like a tug of war, creating this tension, let's say it's Saturn and Mars, I might like the Mars, and so I look at the Mars, but then I can't see the Saturn.
Right.
And so I bump into people in my life who get on my case, who slow me down, who, read rules at me or whatever. But let's say that I don't like my natal Mars because it scatters my energy, and I become super disciplined, and I become known for, whether I'm a musician or an athlete, doesn't matter. I become known for how disciplined I am. But then I may bump into people who are fiery and feisty and want to encourage me to do other stuff or whatever, because one planet isn't getting seen.
Right.
What happens when a planet goes retrograde is that it gets so loud that often early in life we're told to shut it up. And this is something that was much worse 100, 500, 1,000 years ago. Why? Because if you grew up on a farm, and your parents were farmers, or your dad was a shoemaker, and you were a guy, you just were assumed to become part of that shop and then to become a shoemaker. Now, if you had the super active Mercury going and you wanted to learn how to read and do books and write and whatever, tough shit. You had this life you had to live, and that could make you crazy. And if you were a woman, it was even worse, because women were basically brought up and trained to be housewives and then sold. We call it, it's the whole thing of having, of the process of, I'm missing the word, of a dowry. of basically paying someone to take your daughter, and then
Right.
the daughter is their property. But the point again is, if that person has a really strong Mars and can see how to make things happen and how to direct people and live in a world where these guys are doing it and they're idiots, and this woman wants to step in and do it, she can't. And so it may end up making her really crazy.
Right.
And so retrograde planets are difficult for two reasons. But if we understand what those two reasons are, neither of them in this day and age have to be difficult. One of them is that planet's loud. If you have a retrograde Pluto, then yeah, there may be more intensity, more power, more passion than someone else has. How do you work with that energy? How do you somehow find an outlet for it so it doesn't become bottled up and stuffed? Because that's when it creates problems.
Right. And when it starts to interject, you can.
And then the other piece is that if it goes over territory it's been over already, if that's impacting planets that you have, then all of a sudden something that just lasts a day or a week or a month might last months or even years.
Right. And my question was, if we're talking about like this Pluto return as well, and talking about like the Pluto of a country, like if we're going through the Pluto retrograde, which will come every now and again,
every year for about 5 months.
Right. And like as a country, how can the US sort of, instead of bottling that Pluto-ness up, how can the US express it in a more positive way? Or is that something that we can't really do individually?
In the last book Carl Jung wrote before he died, he wrote a book called The Undiscovered Self. And in it, he said that politicians running around the planet trying to make treaties and peace will never accomplish peace. Peace will be found only when peace is found in all the individuals in the world.
Right.
What do? Is we contribute to all the world by making peace and taking care of our own brush fires before they feed into other people's brush fires that end up, in an armed revolution somewhere.
Right. Totally. Well, love that.
So, yeah,
you did say you wanted to talk about Pluto and Venus.
I do. But this is my whole thing of think cosmically, act locally. It's great that we think about all this cosmic stuff. I live for this. On the other hand, if you don't apply the cosmic stuff to your individual lives, why bother?
Right.
Okay. So part of this Pluto return is heightened by the fact of all the other energy that has been running through Pluto while it's in Capricorn. We tend to think of aspects as isolated factors. It's the way we learn astrology. Unfortunately, planets are not just particles, they're waveforms. Wait a minute. Did Rick finish the thought of having a Capricorn moon during this long-ass Pluto transit, or did I miss that? Tell this double Capricorn something, please. I'm not sure what you're asking. Did I finish the thought? The thought is that if you take the actual degree and the moment that Pluto is conjunct your natal moon, for those of you who have a Capricorn moon, something may have big have happened that day or that week, but it's not about that day or that week. It's about the 2 or 3 year process of coming and going. It's almost like first you see this black limo driving around the neighborhood, not knowing who it is, but it's making you feel kind of, a little, and then you wake up in the morning and you find him making coffee in your kitchen, and you can't get rid of this character. This is Pluto. And eventually you find him in bed next to you every night. And then, a few years later, as the transit is waning, again, he's not in your bedroom, but he's still like a character in your house. You see the shady, kind of figure here and there. And even years later, you can still see him driving around the neighborhood in the black limo.
Right.
The point is, Anella. It's basically not in a given moment that it occurs, because what happens is the faster moving planets create triggers. You know, Saturn and outward, those planets are chronic. Saturn is Latin for Greek chronos. A chronic behavior or a chronic illness is one that has settled in over a long term. Now, often someone can die from an acute illness that may only last a day or two, but an acute illness that can come and go very quickly will come and go very quickly unless there are other things going on. And it's the other things going on that are heavier, the chronic things, that sometimes allow that sometimes allow an acute transit to kick off larger scale events. And the planets work the same way. We have Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto transits, but sometimes it's a new moon or a Venus conjunction or something that happens that basically triggers the cascade of events, even when the aspect itself is not exact. So here's the thing with this Pluto return, or in fact, even Pluto in Capricorn in general, because the Pluto in Capricorn, remember, Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius is Pluto. I'm sorry, when Pluto is in Capricorn or Aquarius and it conjoins Saturn, that is when Saturn is at its strongest, when it's in its domicile. So this recent conjunction of Saturn and Pluto occurred in Capricorn, and the last time there was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn was when Martin Luther nailed the theses on the wall of a church in Germany that basically created the Protestant Reformation, and the actual event of him nailing that on the wall of this church. I mean, this is in the 1500s, and he actually did this in November of, let me get this right. It was on Halloween. It was on Halloween in 1513. I can get the date here just in a real quick second. There it is right there. The date he actually did that was 1517 on Halloween night. The Saturn-Pluto conjunction occurred in January of 1518, only 2 months away. And so the beginning, the kicking off of this particular phase of Pluto that we're in right now was Saturn in his own sign creating a container containing, which is what Saturn in Capricorn does and what Saturn does. And in some ways, the changes that are coming out of this will be historically as big as Martin Luther kicking off the Reformation. But it took, 50, 100 years before anyone then realized how big this was all going to be. I mean, when you're in the middle of an event, you can't quite see it. So first we have Saturn and Pluto, but not a normal 3 times a century Saturn and Pluto. This is a once in 500 year event. Then you add to that the fact that the South Node is there. And the South Node backed over both Saturn and Pluto. And then you add the fact that Jupiter was there, and then Jupiter swept over Pluto, retrograded over it, and then went direct over it again. So now we've extended this Saturn-Pluto event that was on January 20th, incidentally, the day of the Wuhan laboratory announcing the genome of the virus and the first quote unquote reported mortality, and I say reported mortality of the virus was on January. I said 20th, I meant January 12th of 2020. But then we had Jupiter go over it, and of course these were the explosion dates, not only of the COVID pandemic or the pandemic of fear, but also magnified by so many other issues, including the murder of George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter, all of this intertwined in there. So that's the Jupiter kind of expanding the bubble, making it even more. But you see, each of these planets, Saturn and Jupiter, and then eventually the inner planets are all going to come over Pluto and do their thing. And they're going to come over Pluto and square Uranus. And over the last few years, everything went over Pluto and squared Uranus. But now, because that square it's after, they're all doing it the other way around, and the Uranus is coming after rather than before. And so what's happening now is that Saturn has gone over Pluto, and then Saturn squared on and off all last year Uranus. Then Jupiter went over Pluto, and a year ago in January, it squared Uranus. Well, right now we have another incredibly crazy rare event. Oh, and I should mention also the fact that there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December of 2020. That was not just a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. It was part of a grand mutation cycle, another once in 5 century kind of a thing. So we've had the stacking up of stuff. And into this, we now have a period of time where we had Venus turn direct. Venus actually, the end of December, conjoined Pluto, turned retrograde, went back over Pluto, now turned direct, and will go back over Pluto the third and final time on the day of the new moon on March 2nd. This is a crazy new moon because at that same time, Mars, which has recently moved into Capricorn, will actually catch up with, because it's moving faster than Venus, because Venus is still moving slowly coming out of the retrograde, and the two of them will conjoin while they're conjoining Pluto on a new moon. And on top of that, we have Mercury having just direct retrograded back over Pluto and then direct over it again. So we've had Venus and Pluto do 3 sweeps each over Pluto. And the last time Venus did a direct retrograde direct over Pluto was about 200 years ago. This is not something that happens normally. And you see, when an inner planet makes a 3-hit, now we're back to the retrograde phenomena, because normally Mercury will line up with Pluto once a year for about a day. Except this year it did it for about a month and a half. Because the first sweep to the retrograde begin, the second sweep to the retrograde end, to the third sweep extends that conjunction over a larger period of time. Venus doing the same, Jupiter doing the same last year. So I don't mind what date you use for the actual Pluto return. If you want to use February 20th of this year, which is the tropical first hit of the 3 of them, great. All I know is that for the last couple of years, even going back to the initial Saturn conjuncting Pluto in January of 2020, things that have been hidden, things that are underworld, things that are unconscious, things that have to do with suppression based upon holding on to power, these are all things that have been highlighted. And they continue to. I don't know if anyone read the news today, but the latest thing is not only did our fearless leader Donald Trump take cartons of documents that belonged to the U.S. government to Mar-a-Lago, not only were many of them marked top secret, but now it's come out that his toilet was often clogged because he would flush papers down the toilet. Now,
that's wild.
I'm not here to raise. I'm steering clear of political. I'm just telling you the event, and that is as Plutonic as you can imagine. Flushing flushing documents that you don't want anyone to see down the toilet, and
That's
having
very literal.
it's a literal transit. So so with all this stuff with Pluto, and Pluto returns, we don't know what happens to a human at a Pluto return because we don't live that long.
Right.
I have to be honest, it's on my list to do, but I've not really delved into civilizations that have lasted longer, like Rome, for example. What did they go through on their Pluto return? Sometime in the next month or two, when I get to that, I'll come back with some of that data. And if anyone else wants to do that deep dive, I'd be open to hearing it from you. And Teresa, you said, "Oh my God, how did you know that?" Are you referring to the flushing of the documents? It was on the news today. Yeah.
I found it so funny because when you said it's on my list to do, you said it right after saying humans don't live that long, and I was like, "Oh, you want to live as long to have a Pluto return yourself? That's rather bold."
I'm happy with 70, 80, 90 years or so.
Oh, I would love to live long enough to have a Pluto return. It's quite the feat.
So while you live long enough to have a Pluto return, I'll be back 3 times.
That's true. Oh man. But so it seems like the best thing to do, especially with like the whole timing thing, because it's such a long process, is that just to watch it, observe it, and like do your best to just live your life as it is. Like nothing.
Yeah. No, it's true. But Joe, imagine this. I sometimes think that Saturn transits are easier to deal with than Pluto transits because of the time distortion that occurs. You see, with the Saturn transit, even if it's a direct retrograde direct, and by the way, if you have a Saturn transit that hits 3 times, I've heard astrologers get together and someone go, "Oh, I got Saturn coming up to my moon, and why couldn't it just be 1 hit? It's 3 hits. This is going to last 8 months." And all I can say is from observation over years, I would much rather have a 3-hit Saturn, a difficult Saturn transit, than a 1-hit, because when they come sweeping through once, they come through hard and powerful, and everything happens at once. Whereas when you get the direct retrograde direct, you have process time.
Right.
It's the process time, then, if you go in and do the work, that actually allows the transit to have some positive effect. It's much more difficult to manage on a one-time sweep. But the thing about a Pluto transit, a Pluto transit is kind of like, it's like surfing a tsunami, except the tsunami, which would normally come through in a matter of seconds, is a glacier that's coming through in a matter of years. You see, if you're standing on the edge of a glacier, you don't know that it's moving. And yet it's taking down trees, it's taking down mountains, it's basically reforming the land with much greater power than a tsunami, but a tsunami happens all at once. And so when you're surfing that tsunami, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should, and I'm really talking metaphorically, thank you very much, but if you're surfing that tsunami, every moment it's like, oh, this correct. Oh, no, the wave just, you're basically, you're in that balancing motion of always like, if that's a Saturn transit, it's, oh my God, my boss just called and blah, 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 blah. Oh crap, I just broke my ankle now. The things that happen, and of course they're not all necessarily bad, but when they happen, you have to react to them, and they happen at a speed where you can react.
Right.
So you're on your surfboard on a glacier. Nothing's happening. Well, I guess I can go to sleep. I don't have to pay attention because nothing's happening. But what's happening is so huge that you don't see what's happening moment to moment. So the medicine that I would give for someone with any kind of Pluto transit is the medicine of time transformation. Is the and I don't even mean taking plant medicine, although I'm certainly not against that in right situations. That's not what I mean. But I mean, take a meditation tablet and say, I need to focus on what's going on now and compare that to what went on yesterday and what I want to go on tomorrow and what was going on last month and what was going on 5 years ago and what these larger changes are and where am I, and try to see things from a larger perspective, because yesterday, today, and tomorrow are not nearly as important in a Pluto transit as last year, this year, next year.
Right.
Or the last 3 years, this year and the next 3 years. And so we have to shift our focus with Pluto transits, because otherwise we get lazy and we don't think anything's happening because the glacier is basically not moving. But when we're talking about Pluto, there is one other thing that we really should talk about, and it's about ego. And it really relates a little bit to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You see, Pluto is complete transformation, like a butterfly becoming a caterpillar, becoming a butterfly, becoming a caterpillar, becoming a butterfly, etc. There's nothing apparently that connects the caterpillar and butterfly physically, but obviously we know that when that caterpillar gets in the chrysalis stage, and the outside of the cocoon hardens a bit, we know that the caterpillar dies, or at least its eyes melt and its bones and skin disintegrate, and what's left is just this pool of black, brown, goppy something,
Right.
that used to be a caterpillar and isn't yet a butterfly. This process is normal and natural, and the caterpillar gop, the post-caterpillar pre-butterfly, knows exactly what to do to make a butterfly. Pluto is our process of transformation always. Remember, the phoenix only arises from the ashes of the runes of destruction. Operative words here: ashes, runes, destruction. That's the way a phoenix rises. But with our egos, there's no way in hell, and I use the word hell as a double entendre, because the caterpillar getting into the cocoon is entering hell. It disintegrates. There's no way in hell we would consciously get into the damn cocoon. You could wave the caterpillar at us and we go, hell no, I ain't going to go. That's going to kill me. I'll die. But the caterpillar that doesn't have an ego in the way is given the freedom to ride this 2 billion year old life tide, this flow that is perfectly safe. And so we get so hung up in our identity. We have things that happen to us that say, oh my God, this is who I was. I wanted to be a jazz pianist more than anything in the world. My whole childhood. No, my whole childhood was on that. I went to school. I went to Juilliard. I practiced, and I was really good. And then I broke my index finger, and I'll never be the jazz pianist that I. But see, then there's this need for transformation. And the real thing about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's really in its most current form, the version by Lama Sogyal Rinpoche. It's called the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dying, because we're always going through that death and rebirth process. And that's always Pluto. Even it's the school teacher that says, no, you can't write your essay about that. What do you mean? It's what it's like something deflates and you have to change.
Right.
Pluto is that part of us that goes through death, through ego death. And it's the roto-rooter that's the more we resist, the more Pluto is going to come and get us. And yet, if we can develop that awareness, I mean, I've heard say that you don't want to go with the flow, only dead fish go with the flow. That may be a smart-ass way of saying something, and at times it's true. But when Pluto things come in and there are bigger things than you, the more you hold on to and the more you fight,
Right.
the more you're pulling in harder, more difficult Plutonic energy, and the more difficult it's going to be. So, yeah, and I see someone here type not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther. Yeah, I was talking about Martin Luther in Germany in 15, I forgot the date again, 1513 or 1531. I had the date here a moment ago. Yeah. Anyhow, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's namesake. Yeah, it was 1517, not 1964.
Right. Very different dates.
Very different. Okay, so that's, I think, what I have to say. And I don't know.
So
Questions?
you're saying, oh, no, you're reading a question?
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so basically what you're saying is just go with the flow, just live it out, live your life, and you're feeling good?
Well, I'd like to say yes, but no. Because just going with the flow may be acquiescing to a power that actually needs to have some resistance. Remember, water will flow to the ocean. It'll get to the ocean. But if you build a dam in the right place, that water can be used to irrigate rice fields or wheat fields, can feed people or keep people, in water, and then it'll still eventually recycle and still get to the ocean. In fact, a right kind of a dam can make power. And don't get me wrong, I'm not for damming up rivers that kill salmon. There's everything here's a trade-off. But Saturn, not salmon, Saturn, it blocks a flow for a reason. And so I'm not saying we should just go along with it and go with the flow and have fun. Mm. I'm saying we should pick our battles very carefully, and that we should, it's almost like that old Kenny Rogers song, know when to hold, know when to fold, Right. And in a way, that the only way we can really know that, though, is by increasing our awareness. And it gets back to that whole idea of getting the larger perspective, not, oh my God, this just happened. I got a flat tire on my car, and that means I'm not going to be able to go to the job interview tomorrow, which means everything's going to fall apart because I had everything, blah, 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 blah. No, you got to back up and look at the whole thing. And with Pluto, it's about as large a perspective as we can get. And so from that standpoint, it's really important not to get so caught up in whatever the urgency is of the moment, although there'll be times when the urgency of the moment is so important that if we don't get into that completely, we'll die. Right. So I'm not saying one or the other. I'm saying it's about awareness.
Yeah, so you even brought up, I think you brought up yoga at some point, and that really reminds me of that, because sometimes yoga, you just want to release and you just want to bend into in the pose and just relax, but then you don't want to do that when you're doing a handstand. You're definitely fall on your face if you just relax on a handstand. So exactly, flexibility, I guess, or strength. Depends on the time.
It depends on the time. And again, remember, the word yoga just came from the yoke of an oxen. And so the oxen has power, but the power of the oxen is of no use, no value. I'm not sure why my video just disappeared, but no, I'm back.
No, you've been here.
That the oxen has a tremendous amount of power, and it represents in a way the power that we have as humans. But it's by putting the yoke on the oxen that gives us the ability to plow the field to do the real work. And by the same token, whether it's asanas or jhana yoga, a mental yoga, or a karma yoga, a doing yoga, yoga is basically a practice of discipline that creates the ability to harness the power that otherwise is scattered or not there, so that we can plow the field. That's what the real word of yoga or the yoke of an oxen.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I love that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
enough for now, maybe, unless
Yeah.
anyone has any pressing, and that's not depressing, but any pressing questions.
I think the comments all look really stoked on the yoga metaphor. And I feel like that if we even thinking about like, because one of the things that I like to think about is always remediation. I feel like yoga could be like a good way to like really harness those skills of like knowing when to be flexible and knowing when to harness those strengths. But yeah, and that actually reminds me of the course that's coming up, the Cosmic Calendar course, which is
Aha.
all about
Also,
yeah.
Christopher Renstrom.
I started taking a listen to it because I'm doing some of the work behind the scenes, and it's so good, especially for me as an electional astrologer. Like it's so much, it's so technical, and you're always thinking about these like really tiny degrees and all those things. But Christopher really just makes it like so simple, and it takes it into like a very poetic and easy way for anyone to understand, which I love. And it's actually open for enrollment now, so anyone can go and sign up for the course at astrologyhub.com/cosmic calendar. I'm gonna
Is that one word? Cosmic calendar, one word?
Cosmic calendar all together.
Cool.
Yes. Well, Rick, that was a pleasure. I was honestly so nervous because I'll disclose that now because I'm a big fanboy. I've been following your podcast for so long, and oh man, especially the Uranus podcast that you did not too long ago with Chris Brennan. That for me, like as a new astrologer, really as a new astrologer learning modern astrology, getting that look at Uranus and now Pluto with you has been such a big privilege. So thank you so much for being here with me.
Well, all I can say is that it was my pleasure. And although I am a fanboy of Amanda's, I think you did a great job for your first time.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, no problem with that at all. Pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for today then. And thank you guys for being here. And I always wanted to say this. Thank you as always for making astrology a part of your life. All right, guys.